To this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 6 of season 7, and today we're going to be covering Ginny and Georgia. I'm going to get straight into this because basically I've just watched episode 8 and it has stirred a lot of feelings within me. So I want to keep this introduction short and sweet to get into that because it's a hard one. It's a really difficult episode to watch, and I really just want to talk about it. I felt a lot throughout this. So as you know, I'm over on Patreon now, so if you want to go over there and listen to me talk about Game of Thrones, please do. Again, more content will be coming as and when it is recorded. I'm trying to get as many episodes on there as possible right now. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world as well, so I'm trying to just keep it light and keep it entertaining. And I hope it is. I hope the sound of my voice is a calming influence for some people. I've been told that it is. I've been told that it also sends people off to sleep, so I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But I think I'm just going to get into this episode because I think I need to talk about it. So let's just do that. So this is Ginny and Georgia, season 2, episode 8 to 10, and this is also the finale of that season. Episode 8, Hark, Darkness Descends. Now, after that introduction, I just want to say that this did really affect me, this episode. It was hard-hitting. And this episode is pretty all over the place. Not writing-wise, it's well written, it's well put together, but it is focusing on the different characters instead of just Ginny and Georgia's story. And so it focuses on, like, Max and Abby and Marcus, mainly Marcus, but it also goes into a bit of Joe's story and a bit of what's going on with Cynthia. So it isn't just based around the main cast members, it's based around pretty much everyone. And generally when the episode opens, it's usually Ginny or Georgia that are talking. Sometimes they're talking together about certain things, and that's what the episode's going to explore. This one, however, opens with Marcus, and he's doing a voiceover. And generally what happens is they bookend the episode. So Ginny and Georgia will talk, or Ginny or Georgia will talk, and then at the end they'll wrap it up. This one starts with Marcus talking and ends with Marcus talking. But I think first of all I'm going to start talking about Joe, and Cynthia as well. I think I've noted before that Cynthia and Joe have been sleeping together. But Cynthia also knows that something is different about Joe. Whenever he's around Georgia, there is this feeling that comes from him, and she's picked up on it. And so she's stopped responding to his text messages, because he's obviously got a thing for Georgia and he's had it for years. And now Cynthia has picked up on that. But we see that Cynthia is going through a really tough time of it. Again, her husband is in probably his final days. And we see that she is still nursing him at home and that there is still a lot of love there between, well, at least from her side. He is in a non-functioning state and you can't even see any expression from him because he's comatose. So as she's speaking to him, she's telling him how much she wanted to grow old with him, and she wanted to see the wrinkles on his face, and she wanted to be with him until the end of both their days. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen. Cynthia at this point, I mean, I'd say she's probably around early 40s. I'm not sure what the actress is who's playing her, but I'd say around early 40s. And so you've got to think that potentially they had a good 40 years left in them, and now her husband is on his way out. You know, there's been times in my life when I've thought that the person that I've been with at the time is going to be the one that will see me through, that will see me to the end of my days. Well, unfortunately, that's not happened, and it's really difficult when those people are still in your life. I mean, I'm going to come to that later on with Marcus and Ginny, but it is so difficult. Having that person there loving and caring and supporting for them, but ultimately you know that this isn't going to work for whatever reason, whether that is differences between the two of you or, in this case, him being on his way out. It's tragic. However, as for Joe, we were talking about him, since he's actually had this chat with Cynthia and that they're going to call things off because she sees that he is into Georgia, we also see how he was back in the day, him when he was at school. Because, of course, we've already seen Joe when he was at school previously, when he met Georgia out in the middle of nowhere when Georgia actually found out that she was pregnant with Ginny. And he hung on to that for a long, long time. He comes back into school and he seems to be a bit of a nerd, although he's trying to act like a bad boy. And so he tells his friend that he's got access to the actual test papers that the school's going to be running for the year. And because he is a trusted student, he's also been able to make copies of them and is thinking about selling them. His friend can't believe that he's going to be this reckless, but hey, he's on board. However, later on, after getting into it with a bully, he actually fits this bully up for the crime. He plants the test papers in this kid's locker and puts in an anonymous tip about him. So when his locker gets raided, they obviously find these papers. And so I can only assume that this kid either got suspended or expelled for that. But we see that as much as people think that Joe can't be ruthless, he can at times. He's such a nice guy whenever he is on camera that it's difficult to see him be a different way. He goes over to see Cynthia and tells her that she's exactly right. He denied it earlier on when she confronted him, but now he wants them to be okay with each other. He wants them to still be friends, even though they've obviously shared intimate moments together. Cynthia says exactly the same thing. She's obviously got other things to be thinking about right now, but she wants to be there for Joe. And so he tells her that he is into Georgia. There's just something about her, and he doesn't know why, but he's into her. She tells him that she'll stand by him and that she'll help him, but she warns him off and says that he needs to be careful when it comes to her. And he's right, much later on. So, like I say, a lot of the time in this episode, it sort of flits around what Ginny and Georgia are doing, but doesn't show you explicitly. And I think it comes up more in episode 9 of what those two do and why they are in the mood that they are in. So I'll cover that more in episode 9. But it seems like ultimately this whole thing with her husband finally gets to Cynthia, and she breaks down in tears talking to Georgia about it. Okay, so let's talk about the two, I'm not going to say lesser members of Meng, but essentially they are, because they're on screen less and their story isn't as told. Nora has been dating her boyfriend for 3 years, and it is their anniversary. She seems to be really pissed off with the fact that her boyfriend generally underperforms when it comes to these types of things. He is obviously a young man and doesn't really know how to treat his woman. Everyone else seems to think that this is an absolute joke because basically his choices are for a romantic date, whether to go to Blue Farm or to Costco. And you can see that this is starting to weigh on Nora. Her and the girls earlier on start to laugh about this, but it seems that this is really starting to get to her. And when she goes for her 3-year anniversary date, it seems like her boyfriend has actually booked to go in Blue Farm. They sit down and he gives her a milkshake, but she just isn't bothered. And later on at the school, during a school performance that Max is in, which we will come to, we see Nora ignoring her boyfriend when he tries to be affectionate towards her. Abby, on the other hand, has really been going through the ringer. We know that she's obviously got parents who are divorced. She's got body dysmorphia. And more recently, we've seen that potentially she is bulimic. But we see more hate towards herself in this case when she's sat round at Max's and she gets a text message off the guy who essentially told her she was fat in the last episode. And everyone's teasing her and asking her if she's into this guy, but she says no, he's a dick. However, later on, we see that they're actually sleeping together. And she tells him as much when they're actually in the room together. She tells him, I hate you, hate what you stand for, but then proceeds to drag him into bed and sleeps with him. And this is a massive secret from everyone. This guy's part of their friend group, but he's always the one who is a bit of a dickhead. And nobody really seems to like him, but it's his basement that they always hang out in. So they kind of have to hang around with him. But later on at the performance at the school, we actually see him try and be sweet towards her. He holds her hand during the performance, but when he actually feels her leg, he feels the tape that is wrapped around her thighs because she's scared of having fat thighs. And when he asks her whether it's tape, she bats him away and tells him, just fucking leave it. And so we're going to get more developments from that relationship and where it's going to go, but it's quite worrying for Abby because she doesn't really have a voice in the show yet. And yet she's telling such a great story and such a tragic story. And then we'll get to Max. Like I said, Ginny's probably going to come in episode 9, so I'll talk about what happens parallel to this episode in episode 9. But Max is in a real state. She wants to get this play right. She really wants to nail it. But she's having confidence issues, which is something that Max generally doesn't have. She's usually pretty on point. But the reason that she's having these issues is because she feels like she doesn't want to be the villain. She wants to be the main part. She wants to be the lead in this play. However, when she speaks to her dad, and it is a fucking beautiful scene, one of my favourites throughout this show. I've always said that I like the dad in the show, and this is probably the reason why. I think he's funny, I think he's great, but he's a great dad as well. It seems in this show he's such a great dad. And he and Max talk, but obviously it's all in sign language, so you get the captions at the bottom of the screen of what's being said. And essentially he tells her that her characters throughout her life were always the silly sidekicks. People like Timon, people like Dopey, and she was always the one that gravitated towards those people. So why does she want to be the lead so much? Those characters are always incredibly developed. And just because she's meant to be seen as this horrible witch, why not play it to the type that she wants to play it as? Someone funny, someone a bit kooky, a bit out there. And when they actually do the play, Max fucking nails it. Everyone on that stage nailed it. And it was such a good production, I'd actually like to watch the whole play, and I'm not a play person, so it was really impressive. And both the lead performance and Max's performance were impeccable. One thing I also love is whenever one of Max's family members is on screen and something is going on. So, for instance, when Ginny did the poetry read, instead of applauding, like everyone does, deaf people hold their hands in their air and shake their hands. And even when he's not in the company of his own parents, Marcus will still do that. And Max will still do that. And it's just such a sweet moment to see that even outside the family, they still keep it up. But when she actually nails it, throughout the episode we keep seeing shots in the crowd of Sophie. And Sophie's so proud of what Max is doing. Max, however, comes off stage and the only person that she wants to talk to is Silver. She's already spoke to Marcus about this and said that she wants to know if Silver's available. And so when she comes off screen, Silver comes over to her and she just grabs her face. And this is one of the most beautiful scenes in the show. She grabs her face, looks at her, and asks for consent to kiss her, and then does so. And it's so cute and so sweet. However, after the play, she heads off home, and Sophie grabs her in the corridor. And when she does, she asks her whether she wants to hang out sometime and grab coffee, because there are some unresolved issues between the two of them. And we can see the dilemma on Max's face. She's got this potential new relationship with Silver, but Sophie has been the obsession for months now, and hasn't really deserved to be that way. When you've had that situation of that person that you've always wanted versus that one person you deserve, it's a difficult decision. And from the looks of things, Max is potentially going to make the wrong one. And now let's get on to Marcus. So we start the episode with Marcus and Ginny in bed. And he is laying looking up at the ceiling while Ginny is laying next to him. She wakes up and runs out the room because she's late. She's meant to be at work and she's not there yet. There's some interesting shots in this episode actually, and one of them is the very start. Marcus's room is fairly dark with a little bit of light coming through. However, out in the corridor it is bright, and when Ginny leaves, we see that she runs into the brightness. His dad comes in and asks if he's okay and basically says, "Are you going to get up? any time today. It's 1 p.m. right now. And Marcus tells him soon. And we see that his dad is concerned about him, but he doesn't know what to do right now. Later on, Silver comes over and she and Marcus hang out. But when she does, he takes, I think it's tequila from under the counter and just takes it upstairs. He doesn't give a shit that it's his dad's and he just wants to get drunk. Throughout the episode, we just see this side of Marcus where he is constantly in a situation where he is drunk or hungover. And so when he ends up outside Joe's place and Padma brings him inside at, I think it's nearly midnight, her and Joe sit him down and try and talk to him about what's going on, but he's just in a situation where he doesn't want to talk. Padma offers to take him home and he apologises to her for everything that he's done. He didn't mean to be the way that he is, but he is. And he feels like he's not good enough for anyone. But before Padma can actually delve into any of it, Max comes out and gets him out of the car and takes him in the house. Max also tries to talk to him, but he tells her that he's just not good for anyone. And when Max and her dad speak, after her dad finds that his gin or whatever it was, his tequila is half gone, she tells him, I'm worried about Marcus. And her dad says, I am too. And we see that it's not going unrecognised by the people that love him the most that he is in a bad situation. But at this point, nobody knows what to do. Another interesting shot is when they are walking down the corridor. Ginny and Marcus are walking together hand in hand and he looks glum. He looks in a right state. She, however, is quite bubbly and quite Ginny. Ginny, whenever she's at school, whenever she's not got the weight of the world on her, she is quite happy and vibrant. And the colour palette between the two of them shows. Marcus is all in black, where Ginny is in like an orangey top. And it is standing out of the screen, whereas Marcus is blended into the background. And it just seems that whatever is affecting Marcus is going to be a bad omen for both he and Ginny at this point. And then we get to the performance. Marcus is trying. You can see that he is trying, he is there, he is sat with Ginny. Ginny, however, at this point has had some news. She's spoken to the private investigator and he's given her some news. Once again, we'll get back into that in episode 9, but for now we can see that it's affecting Ginny in a really odd way. She's never acted like this before, especially when Marcus is around. And she seems mad at him. Anytime that he tries to be kind to her or puts his arm around her, she bats him away or gets up and leaves. After she's come back from the toilet, he actually stands out in the corridor with her and they talk. And he tells her that he doesn't want to hold her back from anything and that this is all on him. This is all his fault. This is how he feels and he doesn't know what to do for the best. She begs with him. She absolutely begs with him to be with her. And he can't. He wants to do what is best for both of them. Like I've said, this thing that Georgia said to him has really got in his head and it's really depressed him. And it's not like he's not a depressive person in the first place. The conversation between him and Ginny is similar to ones that I've had in the past. I've stood on both sides of that argument, where I have tried to do the best for the people around me and try and make sure that people are happy, even though I don't think I can provide them with the happiness that they deserve, which has not always gone to plan. It's a difficult place to be in when you just want to be away from it all, when you don't want to open up, when you don't want to engage anymore, when you can't engage anymore, when it's just got too hard for you, when the world has just got on top of you too much. And then I've been on Ginny's side, where the person that you love with everything that you've got turns around to you and says that this is over, and you don't want to believe it, you don't want to think about it, you certainly don't want to be in that situation. You want everything to just stop so you can just not be there anymore. And it's heartbreaking watching that scene, really is. And I think I'm potentially going to have to watch it again because I'm pretty sure it appears in episode 9 as well. And then at the end of the episode we get the dialogue from Marcus. Essentially, he talks about how being in the room that he's in is where his depression lies. But even in the room, he wants to be with her. He loves her, and he can't stop loving her. But being on the other side of that, you've got to be prepared to be loved. And right now, he's not prepared to be loved by anyone. And so, he believes that being single is the best course of action. And that doesn't stop. I feel that same way right now. I don't know if loving me is the right option for anyone. That's sad. It's true. However, Max comes in and she lays down with her brother just to support him, look after him, care for him. But as they do, in the neighbourhood, a shot rings out and they both look up asking, was that a gunshot? Episode 9, Kill Gil. And so, like I said, we get exactly the opposite of what we saw in episode 8. The story is built around both Ginny and Georgia at this point, and we see the mirror of what actually happened in certain situations. And so I think we'll start with Ginny. She wakes up and she rushes off to work, as we already know. But before leaving, she asks Marcus if they can hang out later on, and he tells her that he can't because he has an English report to write. She gets to work and she tries to do a little matchmaking with one of her other friends called Bracia, who is into a guy who is also in the play that we see throughout the episode and is into a guy who is in that play, but it turns out that he is also into her. And so we keep seeing this happier side to Ginny. She's trying to help people out, she's trying to be a good girlfriend, and we actually see a difference in the tone. So when she wakes up in Marcus's room, it isn't the doom and gloom with the haloed background of the doorway. It's just a room. When we see them walking down the corridor a little bit later on, yeah, Ginny's shirt's vibrant, but it isn't against this sort of sepia background. It's not a dark, dull background that only her top is shining from. Everything seems to be vibrant, everything seems to be in living colour. And we see that this is the way that Ginny is seeing the world as opposed to the way that Marcus is seeing the world. It turns out that Ginny has dropped the class that she actually took and has took up an English class 2 grades lower than what she would have normally taken. And so she's in there with the likes of Abby and Nora, but also she's in there with Marcus. Of course, this is going to just prove that Marcus is holding her back when she gets into the room and they're reading Romeo and Juliet. She, however, already has a copy of the book and it's already marked up. She's read it 2 times previous in other schools. And so she's an expert in the text now compared to the other classmates. And Marcus just sees the disappointment on her face when the others start reading and she looks around the room and she sees people playing on iPads and talking on phones and not actually concentrating or taking the class seriously. But also, Marcus, it seems, hasn't actually done the work that he was going to. He told Ginny that they couldn't hang out because he was doing a paper, but it turns out that he hasn't done that. And so any time that he's making these excuses now, it's hurting Ginny because she is catching him out in the lie. After Ginny has a talk with Georgia where Georgia actually reveals another secret about herself because this private investigator has actually been looking further into her past, which we know about. Georgia tells Ginny about Anthony Green and how she accidentally killed him. Again, we don't know if it was accidental, but we can only take Georgia's word on this. And she tells Ginny that she accidentally gave him an overdose. And when Ginny asks if there's anything else that she wants to tell her, she tells her no, that's everything. And she doesn't actually tell her about what's been going on with Gil or what happened in the past. Because Ginny, it would seem, has been kept from all of that. She then heads over to see Marcus, but when she gets there, she hears Max and Marcus talking. And she only hears the piece of the conversation where Marcus tells Max that he doesn't think that he's good enough for anyone. And that he thinks that he needs to be single, or at least left alone. And before he tells her that he loves Ginny so much, she walks away and heads off to work. After her shift, she speaks to Padma, and Padma asks if everything is okay with her and Marcus. Obviously, we know that Padma had this incident with him the night before where he was drunk, and where he was telling her that he may not want to be with Ginny anymore. And now with this fresh information, Ginny thinks that Marcus is telling others that he wants to split up with her, but he hasn't told her yet. And this is why she has the frosty demeanour when they actually go to the play. And so the next day when they're in class, Marcus once again makes the excuse that he hasn't done his homework, and Ginny realises this is the person that she's with, and that he is lying to her at all times because he keeps telling her that he's busy doing stuff and he's not at all. But also when she comes into the English class, he doesn't even acknowledge her, which is something that he's never done before. He generally always looks her way. Once again, Ginny's at work after school and she speaks to the PI that's investigating her mother. He wants to tell her about Anthony Green, but obviously she already knows the story. And she tells him, you can't shock me with anything. He doesn't really have that much on her mother, and is probably going to be leaving town soon because, well, there's no point in being here anymore. But he says that he's stuck around even though he's not being paid because he's worried. He's scared for what's going to happen to the kids because of everything that George has done. But Ginny stands up for her mother. We saw in the last few episodes that she's started to create this bond with her mother now. Now that things are starting to open up a bit more, she is on her mother's side at all times. And so she just defends her mum, as any good child would. And then that night she goes over to the school and she sees the play. We see her and Marcus split up again, and she runs off round the corner, hoping for one thing and one thing only, that Marcus will follow her. He does start to walk towards, but he doesn't. And then she runs out the school in floods of tears and runs home. Once she gets home, she collapses into her mother's arms and tells her all about what's been going on. Georgia keeps telling her that boys are stupid, and yeah, we are, and that she doesn't have to worry about anything. It seems that whatever Georgia wanted, she's sort of got, because she got into Marcus's head about all of this, and he began to see that he was not a good influence for Ginny. And so this poor, depressed lad has ended up breaking this poor girl's heart. And so Ginny has felt that first love, and it's not gone the way that she wanted, as for many of us, it never does. And so we'll get on to Georgia. That very morning she speaks to Paul, and she knows that they are around about 6 days out from their wedding. And this is 3 days before the gunshot. So she heads downstairs and she finds Austin and Gil in the kitchen. Gil has started eating her cereal, so he's really made himself at home while he's been in town. And obviously, Austin is the one who's probably let him through the door. She tells him that this isn't a good thing, that she doesn't want him around and he needs to stop doing what he's doing. He tells her that he doesn't care. He can do what he wants because he has a lot of information about her that maybe she doesn't want getting out. And especially when it comes to Paul. But he's quite happy to let her live the way that she wants to live because he knows that ultimately he can keep blackmailing her, and eventually when she marries Paul, he'll get what he wants. He'll get as much money as he wants. And from the past, we see that Georgia was getting ready to leave Gil because he'd been so violent to her and he just was a nasty piece of work. Ginny hadn't seen any of this, but Georgia tells her that they're going to go and live in Oklahoma, and it's just going to be the two of them. However, later on in the episode, we find out why she didn't end up going. And of course, that was because she was pregnant with Austin. So now she has to stay with Gil until she can actually put the final nail in his coffin, or at least the final check in his bank, so that she can make sure that he goes away for fraud. Georgia speaks to the PI and he tries to get some information about Anthony Green, but Georgia isn't giving up anything, and she tells him that she knows that he has nothing. He essentially lays out his game plan and tells her exactly what he knows. And she tells him, well, you've got nothing. You're the bad Bond villain who tells me everything that he's going to do before I take him out. So you're gone. You're irrelevant now. He knows this and that he is ready to leave town. Like I said, when I was talking about Ginny, he is on his way out of town. He is just hanging around to make sure that the kids are okay. Georgia heads over to Cynthia's to go and pick up Austin, but Austin isn't there because in the last episode we saw that he went with Gil, and it's just like he said, he's going to do anything that he wants. So if he wants to take Austin, he will. That's his son. But while she's there, Georgia actually sees how bad of a time Cynthia is having right now. Cynthia starts crying about everything that's gone on. She just is in a state. And Georgia comforts her. Even though these two have had this bad relationship before, Georgia can see that she is hurting. And so she takes pity on her. The next morning, Georgia's at work and while she's sat outside Paul's office, Paul gets a phone call. She can hear bits of the conversation, and it seems that he's on the phone to his mother. In the last episode, we actually saw the conversation in full, and he is basically talking about a prenup and the fact that she isn't after his money. But his parents still aren't convinced with Georgia, and they still don't like her. And so when she comes in, she asks about what his mother was talking about, and he tells her that, well, she's just excited for the wedding. But Georgia knows that he's lying. She speaks to Nick, and Nick tells her that his boyfriend, the PI, is actually pulling away, and he doesn't know what to do or say about it. Obviously, Georgia knows that he is on his way out. He's going to be leaving town soon anyway, so it doesn't matter. But he tells Nick that if he wants to go, let him. doesn't matter if he stays around, he isn't worth it, and that Nick can do much better. And then Georgia goes to a town hall meeting. Zion is there and everyone from the town is there, and they're talking about the education budget for schools. George comes up with a great idea and pitches it right there and then. But at this point, Paul didn't have any idea of what was going on. And so when this idea comes out of the blue, he's as shocked as everyone else. But while she's there, she gets text messages from Gil, telling her that he needs to meet her at Blue Farm because a private detective has come sniffing around. She heads over to Blue Farm and they speak about what's going on, but he's very manipulative and he tries to touch her the way that he used to, pushing her hair behind her ear and trying to touch her face. But every time she bats him away, until the last time, because he said something that shocks her. That essentially, she can't get away. He will always be there and he will do whatever he wants. And wherever she runs to, he will find her. And she realises now how trapped she is once again. This incident is seen by both Joe and Cynthia. Cynthia thinks that Gil is a nice guy, but Joe really knows different. But of course, Cynthia doesn't see this. But all that she can see is the fact that Joe likes Georgia. So she's a little bit jealous of this, even though she's broken things off with Joe. But the next day she sees it full force. As they go to drop the boys off at school, Cynthia sees how aggressive Gil is. Cynthia has suggested that Gil get an apartment in the area, but then decides to call round and tell everyone to blacklist this guy because he's a bad guy. He essentially gets a little too handsy and a little too in her face while he's at school, and Cynthia sees this and goes over very much the same way as Georgia did the day before to go and save Georgia. She takes her in hand and just gives her a look of, I've got you back. And it's due to this connection that Georgia ends up doing what she does next. Georgia goes over to see Cynthia again, just to thank her and pick up Austin. While she's there, Cynthia tells her about what's been going on with her and Joe, and confesses that, as nice as it is that he's hanging on, she just wishes that he wouldn't. He was only meant to last till Christmas, and it's now February, and neither her or her son know what identity they've got after this man has gone from their life. And that's what they want to start working on, that's what they need to start doing. Cynthia heads off upstairs to go and look for the boys, and Georgia decides to take things into her own hands, literally. She walks through to the next room and puts a pillow over Cynthia's husband's face. The machines start buzzing and he dies. Georgia doesn't know at this point that Austin and Cynthia's son were actually playing hide and seek, and Austin hid in the cupboard right next to Cynthia's husband. And so he saw everything. He saw his mother come in and kill this man. All throughout the act, Georgia is in tears. She didn't want to do this, but she feels it's the right thing to do, and it means that Cynthia doesn't have to. But why she took it upon herself, I have no idea. Georgia heads home and takes Austin with her, and when she gets back, Joe turns up. He tells her that he's got the sunglasses from the party that they had at his place previously. He tells her, do you know what these sunglasses symbolise? And Georgia tells him, yes, I know what these are. I know where these came from. I know who you are. And it seems that moment that they had way back when has stuck with both Georgia and Joe. He asks her, why did you come here? Everything you do is premeditated. Everything you do is thought about. So why did you come here? Why did you blow up my life? Why are you in town? Why aren't we together? Have you ever thought about me? And she tells him, you've already answered your own question. I always think of everything. And so at some point over the last several years, he has had a part in her mind. After he leaves, Ginny comes home and obviously she is devastated by what's gone on. Then Georgia thinks Paul comes home and she heads downstairs. At the bottom of the stairs, Gil shows his face. He starts to attack Georgia and Ginny and Austin run downstairs. Austin has a gun in his hand and shoots his dad, only in the arm. But now they have an effort to clean up the crime scene. Georgia tells Gil that she'll patch him up and she'll send him on his way. But they need to get everything done before Paul comes home. Of course, Ginny has already had text messages from Marcus asking her if there was a gunshot. She's instructed by her mother to tell him no, but they rush around and they have to put the scene back together to make it look like nothing's happened. Gil heads out and Paul comes home and they look like the happy family. Ginny and Austin head off upstairs, and Georgia comes after and tells them that they're going to be okay as long as they're together. Austin says that he hates his dad and he doesn't want his mother to ever be in that situation. He also mentions something about not killing people. And of course, we already know that he's seen his mother do that. Georgia, after everyone's asleep, heads downstairs and calls the venue where she's going to be getting married. She tells them that there is going to be no marriage. She's calling it off and she's sorry for the late notice. We can now only imagine that Georgia wants to flee, which will uproot both Ginny and Austin now that they've both got into a position where they've both got friends, so it's going to be even harder. Of course, Ginny also has her father not far from there, and so going into the final episode we're not sure what's going to happen. Especially when the PI has actually found out the information that Georgia was at the death of Cynthia's husband. And so now he's suspicious and thinks that she may have killed him. And so he rings the police and tells them what he thinks. So now not only is Georgia potentially going to be uprooting them again, she may have an arrest warrant out. And finally for this season, episode 10, I'm Not Cinderella. So we start directly after the day of the shooting. And of course, Ginny and Marcus breaking up. And with that comes the fact that Ginny now has to go into school and face all of her friends and anyone else that she knows, because it's going to get around school that her and Marcus have now split up. And of course, she's in the same class as Marcus for English. So when she ends up going to that class, they keep looking at each other but just missing each other's glance. And it seems like they're just off kilter with each other. And it all seems broken now. Ginny then goes to work after school and sees Max in there with Sophie. She watches Max's interaction with Sophie and realises that Max has actually grown. And we see this in the way that Max is with Sophie. Throughout, she's quite giddy, but when it actually comes to the crunch and she finds out that Sophie has dumped her boyfriend, Max starts to realise what this is. Now, Max from before would have been jumping all over this. And when Sophie essentially tells her that maybe they can be friends and maybe hang out a bit, Max tells her no. Max tells her that she isn't ready for any of that. Maybe in the future, but not right now. She also tells her that she's starting a new adventure when it comes to dating and she's going to start seeing silver. And in all fairness, I think that is the smart choice and the choice that I really want to see develop because I think that they're really good together. That night, Austin and Ginny go over to see Zion. While they're there, Zion is trying to find out information from both of them, but both of them are just clamming up. They're giving him yes-no answers, and they're not really engaging in the way that they usually would. Ginny tells him the safe option, which is obviously that she's split up with Marcus, but even that's hard enough. He also tells her that he knows about the fact that she has quit her English course. She tells him that she's taking a different English course, and obviously it's a lot easier. He, however, tells her that maybe since you're in Boston, we can get you on a college degree course. He says that he can speak to a few people and maybe pull some strings, and she can actually come out to Boston and study. And that'll probably help her further down the line getting into things like university and college. She seems really excited to do that, but the main factor is that Marcus isn't going to be there. So it's going to be great for her. Potentially next season we're going to see a lot more of Ginny heading out of the town into Boston and potentially being on a college campus. After they get back from Boston, Ginny heads over and hangs out with the girls. Everything seems to be going fine, but just before this, Georgia had come into Ginny's room and she asked Ginny about a place called Lake Powell. And it's only while she's hanging around with Max, Abby and Nora that she realises why Georgia was asking the question. She realises that Georgia's about ready to uproot and move again. Because, as we've seen previously, when she actually spoke to Ginny as a young child about going to Oklahoma. And so now she knows that there's potential that they're going to move. And so she heads back home. The other members of the group go over to the usual hangout in the basement. Once they get there, Abby finds the guy that she's been seeing press. She takes him into the bathroom and they start making out. However, once again he starts being obnoxious and calls her whale thighs, but she hates herself so much that she's willing to do whatever it takes, including just fucking this guy because it doesn't matter to her anymore. She just wants to feel something. They're caught by Nora, and Nora takes her to one side and just tells her, look, what's been going on. She breaks down and tells her how she's been feeling and everything around that. But eventually when Nora's boyfriend comes over, he becomes the centre of her world again. And whatever problem Abby's having, it doesn't really matter. And so she heads back to the bathroom. But once she gets there, the door's closed and she hears someone throwing up inside. The door opens and it's Sam, the girl that the other four have been trying to keep out of their group for a long time now. She's able to hang around with them when they hang out in this basement, but generally they all don't like her. And she doesn't seem to like any of them either. But now it seems that Abby has the potential of having someone as an ally when it comes to this problem with bulimia that she's having. That doesn't stop her, however, going into the bathroom and throwing up. Marcus was also over at the basement, and before he even got there, he was absolutely hammered. When the girls turn up, Max sees Marcus and decides that she's going to take him home. They try to sneak in the house but get caught by their mum, and then they head off up to bed. Ginny heads over the road after speaking with her mum and sees Marcus. Max has already told her that he's got severe depression and that he is taking tablets for it. She goes to see him and tells him that she was so wrapped up in her own stuff that she didn't notice what he was going through, and she's sorry for that. She still loves him and still cares for him, but if he can't do this right now, then that's fine. But he needs to know that she's there for him and that she loves him, just the same way that he loves her. She hugs him and she tells him that if just being friends for now is what he needs, then that's what she'll give him. But she's going to be there for him, whatever. On the other hand, Georgia is going around and essentially saying goodbyes to everyone. She's not doing it directly, but she's saying how great people are and how much she enjoys them being in their life, and always ends up leaving on what seems like a somber note. However, after when she speaks to Marcus and essentially tells him goodbye and thanks him for what he's done, even though he dumped her daughter, she knew why he did it because she essentially asked him to. He tells her that, don't worry about a thing. I'm not going to tell your secret. When she turns back to look at him to see what he means, he does the finger across the throat, and she realises that Ginny's been spouting off her mouth. She heads into the house, finds Ginny straight away, and Ginny has questions for her at the same time that Georgia has questions. Ginny's question is obviously, why are we moving to Lake Powell? We need to stay here. You need to actually face what's going on. You can't keep running. You need to sit down and you need to talk to Paul. You need to tell him everything that's been going on. Georgia eventually realises that she's right. And when she sits down with Paul, she tells him exactly what's been going on. Every single crime, every single bad thing that she's done, apart from the murders, of which now there are 3. She tells him why this is happening and the fact that Gil is going to try and blackmail them. Paul doesn't know what to say and leaves the house. That night, everyone barely sleeps, but in the morning she gets a text message from Paul saying, come down to the office. She gets there, there's a police officer and a lawyer. Gil then turns up and Paul threatens Gil. Tells him, you can come after Austin, you can come after us, but my lawyer's really good, and this is my town, and you will not be allowed back in it. He's then escorted away by a police officer. Paul tells Georgia that he's mad, but he still wants to marry her. And when Georgia heads back home and tells Ginny, she then realises that she has no venue. She cancelled it at the end of the last episode. Ginny tells her, don't worry about it, I've got it sorted. And she manages to sort out Town Hall and actually do a prefab wedding right there and then. And since everyone in the town seems to like Georgia, they all help out. The wedding goes really well and everyone seems to be having a good time. Right up until the point when the PI walks in with the police. And right there and then, they arrest Georgia on the spot. They put her in handcuffs, they put her in a car, and they take her away. And they take her in for the murder of Cynthia's husband, Tom. Austin chases after the car after declaring to Ginny that he never told anyone. And now Ginny has to think about Austin's welfare, but also what he saw. Because essentially he is a witness and could put his mother away. But for that, we'll have to find out what happens next season. Okay, so what did I think of this show and this season? I thought it was excellent. I think of some of the things that it deals with when it comes to mental health and how people are struggling so much these days that you don't even see it. It's a real testament to the show. I think it handles it in a really good way and it shows that a lot of people are struggling out there. It's not too drastic like Euphoria, but it has a similar sort of vibe. Obviously, there's a lot more adult interaction in this show and there's a bit more comedy to it. But for me, it feels very similar rooted. It deals with, obviously, Marcus's issues with drugs and drink, Ginny and Abby's problems with self-harm, Abby's problem with the fact that she's now bulimic and has potentially found solace in Sam. Sam, however, who has possibly been sleeping around, could actually be pregnant. And so it's a real mix of personalities and issues. Now, what I want to see from next season, I'm really hopeful that Max actually gets some peace. I'm hoping that it is a full 10 episodes of Max just being Max and not being angry or depressed or pissed off or trying to win a girl back or whatever it is. I just want that fun Max. And I know that's selfish because people are going through it. But I just don't think I could handle another version of Max from the beginning of this season. And obviously with Sophie being involved, I've got a bad feeling that that could come back at some point. As for Marcus, I would like to see him going into therapy and actually getting the help that he needs, because obviously he is really fallen upon hard times with this whole thing. He actually states to Georgia at one point that the words that she said drove him to do what he did. And so him breaking up with Ginny was due to the fact of what Georgia said. I want more from the dad of that family because I think he's fucking brilliant. So funny, and there are some really sweet moments with him. And especially when he's signing everything, I think it really gives a good dynamic to the show. For some reason, I've got it in my head that Joe and Georgia kissed at one point. So maybe that's what's going to come next season. Her and Paul are going to have issues because obviously she's been convicted of murder. Potentially she gets out on bail and Paul pays the bail. But I think at some point her and Joe have to acknowledge this relationship between them. I am hoping that Gil comes back at some point as well and they dispense of him. I do like Shawn Ashmore in that character because, like I said before, all I've ever really seen him in is X-Men. So he was always a helpful character, but this is such an attitude change for him from that character. Obviously he was a lot younger then, where now he feels like he is such a nice guy and can really turn on the charm when he needs to, but there's just that nasty side to him, and I like it. I think it's a really good trait, but I don't want to see him impacting too much on the story anymore. Maybe that'll come in season 4, I don't know, but I think maybe wrap it up in season 3. But then I don't know what the jeopardy would be for season 4. Right now the jeopardy is obviously trying to keep Georgia out of jail. So maybe season 4 would make more sense. And then we've got Ginny. Now, as I spoke about earlier, if Ginny actually goes off to college and manages to do some English courses at college, that could be an interesting time for her because she's going to be on campus, she's going to be around older boys, and potentially she could see a new relationship there. This whole thing is there to challenge her, and maybe having someone else there that can challenge her as well might be a good thing for her. However, my feeling right now is that it's either going to be a tutor and is going to be inappropriate, or it's going to be someone who is abusive and she's going to start repeating the cycle that her mother did. But who knows? I certainly don't, and I don't even have a fucking start date for it, so hopefully that's going to be coming out soon. I looked at the last time the last 2 seasons came out and they were around about January and February, so hopefully this season, as in season 7 of this podcast, will be wrapped up, and season 8, since it will be dropped all at once, will be out and I can record on what I've watched. So that potentially can come in season 8. I will shift it around if that season does come out then. However, if not, it'll be coming out in season 9, so it'll be there or thereabouts. But as for today, I am done. And as you know, I'm done with this. I'm done with Hannibal. Next is going to be Night Sleeper, which is a British show, bit of a mystery show, and it came out a few months back and I really enjoyed it, and I just wanted to go over that and just rewatch it, and hopefully a few others get to watch it as well. But as for today, I'm done, so thank you very much for listening. I hope you're all doing well out there. I hope to see you over on Patreon as well. But for now, until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.
And that is it for now, amigos. And yes, I am as angry as you are at me for that sentence, but I hope you enjoyed the show and had some fun along the way. It means a lot that you are listening and supporting me. This is an independent podcast after all, and doesn't get a lot of backing, so it's great to know that you're out there, you're listening. And if you want to come talk to me on any of the platforms I'm on, just come say hi. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even a little bit on TikTok. I don't post that much, but I'm on there. And you can also drop comments in the comment sections on any of the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you get podcasts from. But as always, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.